The war had torn Westeros apart, leaving only ashes and broken oaths in its wake. But alliances were forged in fire, and in the aftermath of King Tommen's death, a new path emerged, one that would forever alter the course of history. With the Lannisters weakened and Daenerys Stormborn still across the narrow sea, the Reach sought to reclaim its power. Lady Olenna Tyrell, ever cunning, saw an opportunity where others saw only ruin. Her family had been betrayed, her grandchildren slaughtered by Cersei Lannister's treachery. But the game was not over. Not yet. She needed a new king, one untainted by Lannister deceit. And so her eyes turned north. The North had risen under Jon Snow, the newly crowned king in the North. His victory over Ramsay Bolton had solidified his leadership, but his rule was fragile. The North, proud and stubborn, was weary of politics beyond the Wall. They had no love for Southern houses, especially after the treachery of the Red Wedding. But Olenna Tyrell was no fool. She knew what the North lacked: food. Winter had come, and the northern larders were not full enough to sustain them through the coming storm. The Reach, on the other hand, was rich with grain, its fields untouched by war. A marriage proposal was sent. Jon was wary at first. The war against the White Walkers loomed over him like a storm cloud, and the thought of playing politics while the dead marched south made his blood run cold. But Sansa, ever the pragmatist, saw the value in the offer. "You need allies, Jon," she told him as they stood on the battlements of Winterfell, the wind biting at their skin. "The North cannot fight alone. The Tyrells have armies, food, influence. And Margaery, she is loved by the people. She was meant to be a queen. She could help you." Jon was no politician. He knew war, he knew honor, but he did not know the deadly dance of power that ruled the South. Yet when the Raven came with Olenna's offer, he could not deny its wisdom. And so he agreed. Margaery Tyrell arrived in Winterfell with a small entourage, her presence as warm as the spring after a long winter. Unlike the cold, harsh women of the North, she was all soft smiles and knowing glances, a queen in every sense of the word. Jon expected arrogance. He expected manipulation. He did not expect kindness. She treated the northern lords with respect, charming them with her words, easing their skepticism. Even Lyanna Mormont, fierce and wary, found herself intrigued. But it was Jon she focused on most of all. "You are not what I expected, Your Grace," she said one evening as they walked the halls of Winterfell. Jon looked at her, frowning. "And what did you expect?" "A brute in furs," she said with a small laugh. "A man who cared for nothing but war. But I see now, you are a man who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders." Jon had no answer to that. Their wedding was held in Winterfell, a union of ice and fire, of North and South. The banners of House Stark and House Tyrell flew side by side as the vows were spoken before the old gods and the new. The North watched with cautious hope. The Reach watched with quiet ambition. And far across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen set sail for Westeros, unaware that the game had already changed. Winterfell had never seen a wedding like this before. The great hall was lined with banners of House Stark and House Tyrell, the direwolf and the golden rose standing side by side. Lords from the North watched with stoic expressions, their eyes wary of the southern bride. The Reach's delegation, led by Olenna Tyrell, was equally cautious, their whispers low and measured. Margaery Tyrell was used to being the center of attention. She had been a queen before, twice, and each time she had played the role flawlessly. But this was different. This was not the opulence of King's Landing or the courtly games of the Red Keep. This was the North, cold and unyielding. She understood the challenge before her. If she was to truly be queen in the North, she would need to win them over. Jon stood beside her, uncomfortable in the formal black and silver cloak draped over his shoulders. He had never been one for ceremony, and he looked as though he'd rather face 1,000 whites than stand before the gathered lords. Margaery hid a smile. This was the man she had married, honest, unpolished, and entirely unlike the kings and lords she had known before. When the vows were spoken, the hall was silent. The old gods bore witness, their presence felt in the rustling of the weirwood trees beyond the walls. When Jon took Margaery's hands in his, there was no grand proclamation, no flowery speech. "I will protect you," he said simply, his voice steady. Margaery's heart skipped a beat. This was no political marriage to him. Jon Snow, for all his brooding and reluctance, would treat this union with honor. She had spent her life weaving through the traps of court, knowing that love was a dangerous illusion. Yet as she looked into Jon's dark eyes, she wondered if perhaps this time would be different. The feast that followed was a tense affair. The North did not trust easily, and the Reach was used to the luxury of Highgarden, not the cold stone of Winterfell. Margaery, however, played her part well. She spoke with the Northern lords, showing interest in their customs, praising their warriors. Lady Lyanna Mormont, sharp-eyed and skeptical, watched her carefully. "You don't look like a Northern queen," Lyanna said bluntly. Margaery smiled, unoffended. "Perhaps not, my lady, but I can be the queen the North needs." Lyanna huffed but did not argue. That, Margaery took as a victory. Jon, meanwhile, was deep in conversation with Sansa and Davos, discussing the next steps in preparing for the war against the White Walkers. The Tyrell soldiers and grain would be invaluable, but trust between the North and the Reach would take time. As the night wore on, Jon and Margaery finally found themselves alone. Their chambers were cold, despite the fire roaring in the hearth. Margaery removed her jewelry carefully, watching Jon from the corner of her eye. "You seem troubled, my lord husband," she said softly. Jon sighed, running a hand through his curls. "I never wanted this." Margaery turned to face him fully. "This marriage?" "This game," he admitted. "Politics. Power. I was raised at Winterfell, trained to fight, not to be a king, not to make alliances." She stepped closer. "You fight because you must. You lead because they need you. That is why they follow you, Jon. Not because of your name, but because they believe in you." Jon looked at her, searching her face. "And you?" Margaery smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "I believe in you too." For a moment, the weight of war and duty faded, just a little. But beyond the walls of Winterfell, the storm continued to gather. The dead still marched. The game was far from over. Winterfell had seen war, blood, and betrayal, but never had it played host to a queen quite like Margaery Tyrell. She was a presence unlike any the North had ever known, warm, graceful, effortlessly weaving her charm into the cold walls of the ancient castle. Yet, despite her best efforts, the North remained wary. Margaery knew how to win hearts. She had done it before, in the treacherous court of King's Landing, against the likes of Cersei Lannister. But this was different. The Northern lords were not concerned with whispers and courtly smiles. They cared for survival, for loyalty, for strength, and she was still an outsider. Jon, for his part, had tried to ease the transition. He attended councils with her, ensured she had a voice among the Northern lords, and defended her position when needed. But his own struggles weighed heavily on him. The war against the dead was coming, and every moment spent convincing his bannermen to accept his Southern queen was a moment wasted in preparing for the real battle. Margaery understood his burden. She watched him, the way he carried the weight of leadership as if it were a chain around his neck. She had married kings before, boy kings who played at power, men who let their crowns define them. But Jon Snow was different. He did not want the crown, and yet it seemed to cling to him no matter how much he resisted. One evening, as snow fell gently against the high towers of Winterfell, Margaery stood with Sansa in the castle's godswood. The red leaves of the weirwood tree rustled in the cold wind. "They do not trust me," Margaery said at last. Sansa, who had been silent for some time, turned to her with a knowing look. "No, they don't." Margaery smiled wryly. "I appreciate the honesty," Sansa sighed, crossing her arms. "The North has been burned before. You must understand, Margaery. Alliances with the South have cost us dearly. The Boltons, the Freys, the Lannisters. Southern houses brought us nothing but pain." "And you think I will do the same?" Sansa hesitated. "I think you will do what is best for you." Margaery laughed softly. Perhaps. But tell me, Lady Sansa, do you truly believe I would betray your brother? That I would bring harm to Winterfell? Sansa studied her carefully. No. But that does not mean others will believe it. Margaery exhaled, watching her breath curl in the cold air. She had faced worse odds before, but something about this challenge felt different. For all her charm, for all her experience, she found herself wanting something she had never cared for before. Acceptance. As the days passed, tensions only grew. The Northern Lords were divided. Some saw the value in the alliance, recognizing that the grain and resources of the Reach could keep their people alive through the long winter. Others, like Lord Glover and Lord Serwyn, grumbled that the North should remain independent, that the old ways should not be forgotten, and then there was Lyanna Mormont. During a council meeting, she stood abruptly, her small frame filled with unshakable resolve. "The North remembers," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We remember what happens when we trust those from the South. We remember the price of bending the knee." Jon, standing at the head of the table, exhaled sharply. "I have not bent the knee. No, but you have married a queen of the South," Lyanna countered. Her sharp eyes flickered to Margaery. "And what happens when the war is over? What happens when the Reach remembers that their queen's claim is tied to a throne far beyond the North?" Silence fell over the room. Margaery did not flinch. She met Lyanna's gaze steadily, choosing her words carefully. "I married Jon Snow because I believe in him. Not for power, not for a crown. And yet, here you sit," Lyanna said, "a queen in the North." Jon's hand clenched into a fist against the wooden table. "We have greater concerns than marriage politics," he said, his voice low but firm. "The Night King marches. We need to be united, not divided." The council slowly settled, but the tension remained thick in the air. Margaery sat in silence, listening as the discussion turned back to military strategies, the coming war, and what little time they had left. Later that night, as she lay beside Jon, she whispered, "Do you regret it?" Jon turned his head toward her, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim candlelight. "Regret what?" "This. Us." Jon exhaled, rolling onto his side so he could face her. "No," he said quietly, "but I worry." "About what?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers calloused but gentle. "That you deserve better than this war. Than me." Margaery smiled, pressing a hand to his chest. "You are a good man, Jon Snow. That is worth more than all the crowns in Westeros." But even as she said it, she knew that not all in the North would see it that way. And far away across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen landed on Dragonstone, her dragons crying into the night. The real war had not yet begun. The North had always been a land of ice and stone, of old grudges and unyielding loyalty. Jon had learned that the hard way. Now, as he stood before the gathered lords in Winterfell's great hall, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him like a mountain. Margaery stood at his side, poised as ever, but even she could sense the growing tension. It had been weeks since their wedding, and still, the Northern Lords remained divided. Some, like Lord Manderly and Lord Reed, understood the value of the alliance with the Reach. Others, like Lord Glover and Lord Serwyn, saw only a Southern queen taking up space in their halls. "We need to be united," Jon said, his voice firm. "The White Walkers do not care for our grudges, nor do they care for our alliances. They are coming." "And yet, we sit here," Lord Glover said, his lips pressing into a thin line. "We wait. We speak of grain shipments and alliances. We speak of trust. But trust is earned, not given." Margaery remained silent, but she met Lord Glover's gaze steadily. Lyanna Mormont, young but fierce, leaned forward in her seat. "The North remembers," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "The North has always stood alone. We do not need a queen from the South to fight our battles." Jon's patience was wearing thin. "No, we do not need a queen," he said. "But we need food. We need soldiers. Or would you rather let your people starve? The room fell into an uneasy silence. Margaery chose that moment to speak. I know I am not what you wanted, she said, her voice smooth and measured. I know the North does not trust easily, and I do not expect you to trust me now. But I am not here to take Winterfell. I am here to fight for it. She let her words hang in the air. Lord Manderley, ever pragmatic, cleared his throat. The Reach's support is invaluable. We would be fools to turn it away. Jon nodded, glancing around the room. We do not have time for doubt. We must prepare for what is coming. The meeting continued, but the seeds of distrust had already been planted. That night, Jon sat beside the fire in his chambers, rubbing a hand over his tired eyes. Margaery entered quietly, her green dress trailing behind her. She moved with the grace of a queen, yet there was something different in her now, something hardened. You spoke well today, Jon said without looking up. And yet, I still feel as though I am walking through a storm, she replied, moving to sit across from him. Jon sighed. They will come around. Margaery studied him. Will they? Jon met her gaze, and for a moment, neither spoke. There was an understanding between them, an unspoken truth that neither wanted to voice. This marriage, this alliance, was not as stable as they had hoped. She reached for his hand, and he took it, squeezing gently. We will win them over, she said softly. Together. Jon wanted to believe her. But war was coming, and war had a way of breaking even the strongest bonds. Days passed, and Winterfell prepared for the inevitable battle. Scouts reported increased activity beyond the wall. The White Walkers were moving, and then news came that changed everything. A raven arrived from Dragonstone. Daenerys Targaryen had landed in Westeros. Jon read the message in silence, his jaw tightening. He had known this day would come. He had known eventually he would have to face the Dragon Queen. Margaery, standing beside him, watched his face carefully. What will you do? Jon exhaled slowly. I need to meet her. Margaery's fingers curled, slightly. You would leave Winterfell? The North needs her dragons, Jon said simply. If we are to stand any chance against the Night King, we need fire to fight ice. Margaery understood the logic, but a strange feeling stirred inside her. Jon would go south. He would meet Daenerys Targaryen, the woman who many believed was the rightful queen of Westeros. A woman of fire and fury, a woman who had no reason to welcome his southern wife. She lifted her chin. Then I will go with you. Jon hesitated. It might not be safe. Margaery smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. I am a queen, am I not? I should meet the woman who would claim my husband's allegiance. Jon watched her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we go together. But neither of them knew what awaited them on Dragonstone, and neither of them knew how much everything was about to change. The journey to Dragonstone was long and cold, despite the summer winds that guided their ship. Margaery stood at the bow, staring out at the endless sea, her thoughts clouded by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Jon had been quiet for most of the journey. He was never a man of many words, but she could see the weight of this meeting pressing on him. He needed Daenerys Targaryen. He needed her dragons, her army. But Margaery? She needed to understand this woman who claimed to be the rightful queen of Westeros. When they finally arrived at Dragonstone, the first thing Margaery noticed was how barren it was. The island was nothing like the lush fields of Highgarden or even the cold, stubborn walls of Winterfell. It was stone and shadow, surrounded by the endless sea. They were met at the shores by Tyrion Lannister. Queen Margaery, he greeted, his tone polite but measured. It's been some time. Margaery offered him a graceful nod. Indeed, Lord Tyrion. Though it seems we now stand on different sides of the board, Tyrion smirked. The game does have a way of shifting, doesn't it? Jon stepped forward, his expression serious. We are not here for games. We are here to fight the true enemy. Tyrion gave him a knowing look. Then let us hope her grace agrees. The walk up to the castle was steep, and the weight of what was to come made it heavier. Margaery remained poised, her steps deliberate. She had faced queens before, Cersei, Olenna, even Sansa in her own way. But Daenerys was different. She was fire made flesh. When they entered the Great Hall, Daenerys Targaryen sat upon her throne, regal and fierce. The moment her violet eyes landed on Jon, something shifted in the air. "Jon Snow," she said, her voice smooth yet commanding. "The king in the north." Jon gave a short nod. "Your grace." Then Daenerys's gaze flickered to Margaery, and for the first time, the air grew colder. "And you must be Queen Margaery of House Tyrell," Daenerys said, her tone measured. Margaery stepped forward, offering a small but calculated smile. "I am, your grace. It is an honor to stand before you." Daenerys studied her, and Margaery did not miss the way her fingers tightened on the arms of her throne. Tyrion cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss why we are all here." Jon wasted no time. "The dead are coming. The Night King marches, and if we do not stand together, there will be no throne left to claim." Daenerys leaned forward slightly. "And yet you have come here with conditions. You have come to ask for my help, while still claiming a kingdom for yourself." Jon tensed. "I claim no throne. The North named me their king because they needed someone to lead." "And yet you are married to a woman whose house has long sought the Iron Throne," Daenerys countered. The tension thickened. Margaery smiled, stepping forward smoothly. "And you, your grace, are a woman who claims to have been born to rule. We both know that ambition is not a crime." Daenerys' eyes flashed. "Are you here to make alliances, or to test my patience?" Margaery tilted her head. "I am here to ensure my husband is not forced to bend to a woman who does not yet understand the North." Jon exhaled sharply. "Margaery!" But Daenerys lifted a hand, stopping him. She stared at Margaery, truly seeing her for the first time. "You are not like the others," Daenerys said slowly. "You do not cower. You do not kneel." Margaery's smile remained, but her voice was soft and sharp as a dagger. "Neither do you, your grace. That is why you and I understand each other so well." A long silence stretched between them. Then, surprisingly, Daenerys smiled. "Very well. Let us talk." The meeting lasted for hours. Jon spoke of the White Walkers, the coming war, the need for unity. Tyrion played the role of mediator, guiding the discussion when tempers flared. Margaery remained composed, but she did not miss the way Daenerys kept glancing at Jon, the way her expression softened at certain moments. She knew that look. It was the look of a woman seeing a man who intrigued her, and Margaery did not like it. After the meeting, as they walked through the castle's halls, she turned to Jon. "She likes you." Jon frowned. "What?" "Daenerys," Margaery said, her voice carefully neutral. "She sees you as something more than just a northern king." Jon sighed. "That doesn't matter." Margaery stopped walking, forcing him to look at her. "It does, because when the time comes, she may expect something in return for her help." Jon held her gaze. "I am loyal to my people, and to you." Margaery studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I know, but loyalty does not stop others from wanting what is not theirs." Jon exhaled. "What would you have me do?" Margaery smiled, though there was steel beneath it. "Be careful, my love. Queens can be dangerous creatures." And as they prepared for the battle to come, Margaery knew that the war was not only against the dead, it was against the living too. At fires of Dragonstone burned low as the meeting chambers emptied. Jon had gone to speak with Davos and Tyrion, leaving Margaery alone with her thoughts. The sea roared outside the castle walls, the wind carrying whispers of war, death, and something far more dangerous: power. Margaery had played this game before, navigating treacherous courts filled with liars, schemers, and would-be kings. But Daenerys Targaryen was not just another ruler. She was fire and fury, and Margaery saw it in her eyes, the hunger, the certainty that she was destined to rule. And Jon, Jon was too honest to see the snare tightening around him. Margaery had spent years cultivating a keen sense of people, their wants, their fears, their weaknesses. And Daenerys wanted Jon Snow. She may have claimed the North as an ally, but the way she looked at him said otherwise. It was admiration, fascination, maybe even something deeper. Margaery had fought for crowns before, but this was different. This was personal. She was still deep in thought when a voice interrupted her. "You are not what I expected." Margaery turned to see Missandei, Daenerys' most trusted advisor, standing at the entrance of the chamber. She was composed, graceful, yet there was something piercing in her gaze. Margaery smiled slightly. "That seems to be a common sentiment in the North." Missandei stepped forward, folding her hands in front of her. "You speak like a queen, move like one. But you are not like the others who sought the Iron Throne." Margaery tilted her head. "And what makes you say that?" Missandei hesitated, then said, "Because you do not want it. Not for yourself." For the first time in a long while, Margaery was caught off guard. A slow, knowing smile curved her lips. "You are perceptive." Missandei's dark eyes studied her carefully. "Daenerys is different from the rulers you have known. She is not Cersei. She does not lie. She does not scheme in shadows." Margaery let out a soft chuckle. "No, she simply burns. Those who stand in her way." Missandei's expression remained neutral. "She is the rightful queen." Margaery stepped closer, lowering her voice. "And yet, rightful or not, she watches my husband the way a conqueror watches land they wish to claim." Missandei did not answer. She didn't need to. The truth was clear. Jon stood on the cliffs of Dragonstone, watching the waves crash against the shore. He had always been a man of duty, bound by honor, by oaths. But this was something else. Daenerys had agreed to help, but there had been an unspoken expectation beneath her words. She spoke of unity, of alliances, and she spoke of bending the knee. Jon clenched his jaw. He would not betray the North. He would not kneel. A rustle of fabric behind him made him turn. Margaery approached, her emerald green cloak catching in the wind. She stopped beside him, silent for a moment. "You've been quiet," she said finally. Jon exhaled. "She wants me to bend the knee." Margaery nodded, unsurprised. "Of course she does. A queen does not offer help without expecting something in return." Jon shook his head. "I don't want her throne, I don't care for it. But she wants you," Margaery finished for him. Jon looked at her, frowning. "It's not like that." Margaery smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Jon, I have spent my entire life around rulers. I know ambition when I see it." Jon sighed. "What would you have me do?" Margaery turned fully to face him, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. "Win her trust, take her armies, secure the North, but do not let her believe you are hers to command." Jon searched her face, then exhaled, pressing his forehead against hers. "You know me better than that." Margaery smiled softly. "I do." But she doesn't. Jon wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I married you, not her. And when this war is over, I will still be standing by your side." Margaery closed her eyes, breathing in his warmth. "Good," she murmured, "because I do not intend to lose my king to a dragon." The war came, swift and brutal. Daenerys flew north with her dragons, the armies of Westeros standing against the dead in the Battle of Winterfell. Fire met ice, and the night was filled with screams, steel, and dragon fire. Jon fought on the front lines, leading his men with the unshakable resolve that had earned him the North's loyalty. Margaery did not fight with swords, but she fought in another way, keeping the North united, ensuring the wounded were tended to, making sure morale did not break under the crushing weight of the dead. When the dust settled and the Night King fell, Westeros was forever changed, but the game was not over. With the dead defeated, the question of rule returned, sharper than ever. Daenerys had proven her might, her dragons burning thousands of whites to ash. The North owed her its survival, and she still expected Jon to kneel. The final confrontation came in the halls of Winterfell. Daenerys stood before Jon, her expression unreadable. "The war is over," she said. "Now, Westeros must heal, and it must have a ruler." Jon straightened. "The North will not kneel." Daenerys stepped forward. "Then let us rule together." The words hung heavy in the air. The room was silent. And then, Margaery spoke. "That will not be necessary." All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, calm and composed, her green eyes burning with quiet defiance. "Jon Snow is king in the North, and he is my husband. His place is here, with his people." Daenerys studied her. "You would have him turn away from destiny?" Margaery smiled. "His destiny is not yours to decide." The air crackled with unspoken challenge. Tyrion watched with careful eyes, Davos stood tense, and Sansa held her breath. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Daenerys exhaled. "Very well," she said. "The North will remain independent. But know this, Queen Margaery, should you ever seek the Iron Throne, I will not be so generous." Margaery smiled. "Then I suppose we shall never have to worry about that." But as Daenerys turned and walked away, Margaery knew the game was not yet finished. It never was. Jon stood beside her, watching Daenerys leave. He glanced at Margaery, his brow furrowed. "You didn't have to do that." Margaery turned to him, reaching for his hand. "Yes, I did." Jon squeezed her fingers. "What now?" Margaery looked out over the walls of Winterfell, where the snow had begun to melt, revealing the earth beneath. "Now," she whispered, "we rule." And with that, the Game of Thrones continued. Daenerys Targaryen was not an enemy she could afford to ignore.